Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from the United States, English language, released in the year 2019, directed by Rob Zombie, and this film is called Three from Hell. So Three from Hell basically takes off from where Devil's Rejects left. So if you haven't seen House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, which are widely considered as Rob Zombie's best films, I'm going to have to spoil a little bit of it because this story is a continuation of The Devil's Rejects. So if you haven't seen The Devil's Rejects and you want to see it and you don't want it to be spoiled, then don't watch this review until after you've seen that film. So I'll give you a little bit of time to switch this review off now. Okay, so basically Three from Hell is, you got the Firefly family. So these sadistic serial killers that were shot up at the end of Devil's Rejects, we believe that they're dead, but they've made a miraculous 1 in a million recovery. And now they have recovered and they're in jail. It's the biggest case in American history and they're facing the death penalty. And so one of the family members is put to death, but the other two are left to rot in prison. But then things transpire that allows these two to escape from prison, and now they're teaming up with a long-lost brother as they go on a rampage of sadistic violence, and whether or not they can be stopped once again is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Three from Hell. This is definitely a film that I am a little bit weird surrounding, is because I love The Devil's Rejects and House of a Thousand Corpses. These are films that made me a fan of Rob Zombie. So initially I was really excited to see Three from Hell, but it was 10 years after The Devil's Rejects, so I thought, what is the motive behind making this film? And I had a little bit of a worry that the motive was money, is that after The Devil's Rejects I just didn't know how it could continue from that, because it was basically a cut and dry sort of finish. And I thought that was an absolutely fantastic way to finish these films. And so I thought, well, 10 years later, why are you making this film, Rob Zombie? I had my hesitations, but I was hoping that Rob Zombie would deliver at least something that wouldn't be a waste of time. But unfortunately, I have to say that Three from Hell is probably his worst film. So that's saying something, because I love this director. You know, I even liked 31, which a lot of people hated. I thought that movie had its place, just being really fun and very sadistic. But this movie, I felt as though the motivation behind this film was money. And that was a big disappointment, because it just feels like a complete step below as far as the standard of Rob Zombie is concerned. I felt as though he lacked the passion, the motivation, and he didn't really know where to take Three from Hell. It's like, alright, well, someone gave him the idea to make a third film and just put these characters, played by Bill Moseley and Sherry Moon Zombie, and even a cameo from Sid Haig. So they just said, alright, well, let's just splash these characters on and we'll just do something with them. Is that we know these characters are well liked as far as the horror genre is concerned, but how are we going to make this story feel as though it has a purpose? And no one really could come up with that reason as to why this film exists, which ultimately leads people to the conclusion that this movie was made for money, it was made for profit, and unfortunately, as a result of that, it really does damage the reputation of Rob Zombie and his Firefly family, the movies that he's managed to create to get him that following. And so Three from Hell, it is a step below as far as production is concerned, although I didn't really hate the cinematography. I thought the cinematography, although it looks cheaper, it still had a very grimy feel, and so I didn't mind that too much. I thought there was some violence in the film that was typical of Rob Zombie, and there was some dialogue here and there that once again was typical of Rob Zombie, but unfortunately that is ultimately where the positives end, and this is where the negatives start. This movie is like a caricature. It's like a parody of itself, and this is the same criticism I had of The Human Centipede. The Human Centipede, none of those films were good, but the third movie in particular was so exaggerated, so over the top, that I felt like it was making fun of the other films, where I actually felt that Three from Hell was making fun of House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, is because there was so much overacting and there was so much exaggeration as far as these characters are concerned, especially Sherry Moon Zombie's character of Baby Firefly. Yes, she was completely insane in the other films, but this movie, I felt as though she was overacting at every stage, and I thought, alright, well, this is getting to a point where it's a caricature. They're not as scary as they were in the previous films, because it's trying too hard to give you the impression that these people are insane, and it didn't need to do that. And so I just thought it's making fun of itself, and this is where ultimately it doesn't know where to go with it. And this is the reason why there was no real purpose for this movie existing, is because they have to make a caricature of it, and because it's so over the top and so insane, it gets lost in itself. And so I thought the movie just doesn't really go anywhere. It's just the Firefly family just creating havoc, and that's something they did in The Devil's Rejects. And so this movie doesn't really provide anything new. We get an insight into a long-lost family member that comes into the film, but I just thought, Richard Brate's performance was okay, but it wasn't anything brilliant. I just thought his character was there just to fill in the void of Sid Haig's character. Now, Sid Haig, unfortunately, had passed away, and he looks very ill in this film. You could tell that he was struggling, so it was only a cameo, but that's basically how the way I can sum up this whole film. This whole film is basically one big cameo. It's just to remind you that Rob Zombie had created great characters, but it's kind of like it's making fun of itself, and that, for me, was just really strange. And that's the reason why I came away from this movie liking some aspects, but then disliking other aspects. I thought as far as the violence is concerned, it wasn't as hard-hitting. There's a lot of CGI violence in the film, so it just didn't feel right. And I thought the last quarter of this movie especially dragged like anything. Like, basically, I was looking at my watch quite considerably in the last quarter, especially when the Mexican side of the film comes in. I'm not going to tell you too much, but there's a Mexican element in the movie that I thought was completely unnecessary, and it just made the film drag. It goes for 2 hours, and that is way too long for this style of film, and it just felt like a collection of scenes where the Firefly family were just overacting and just being these really insane people to the point where it becoming a cartoon, and I felt as though, once again, it was making a parody of itself. There are other characters in the movie that are very quirky, but once again, everything just feels exaggerated, and it loses the really nasty vibe that the previous two films had. And so I just don't know why this movie exists. I don't think it does Rob Zombie any favours. I just thought it was a cash grab, and unfortunately that does damage House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects. But if you can treat those movies as standalone films and you can forget about Three from Hell, then that's probably going to be better. So that pains me to say it because I'm a massive fan of Rob Zombie, but if I'm being brutally honest, I just think this movie just doesn't really have any reason to exist, and as a result of that, I'm only going to give Three from Hell 1.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.